This one's a classic.
Old school MapleStory had kind of a weird meta. I mean, I'm not even talking about the whole Night Lord being the only class worth playing thing, or HP washing and leeching with a bishop. No, today I'm strictly speaking about gear. Pieces of armor that in traditional MMORPG fashion serve to increase stats and sometimes have secondary effects that they also provide. In MapleStory, these are also exceptionally iconic and sought-after pieces of armor, and they were ridiculously powerful. The most common among them could give massive attack boosts as early as level 10, that is, as long as you were willing to pay the steep cost. So today, we're going to take a look at one specific type of equipment that had a major impact on old school MapleStory's meta. Before I talk at you about gloves for 20 plus minutes, this video is sponsored by Eidolon. More on that at the end. Today I'm going to be setting up my characters to work on some of their respective skills, which is a part of the game I haven't explored as much as I would like. Barbarian for fishing, my other warrior who's always mining, hunter for trapping, and my wizard for chopping. We'll check back in on them soon. Work gloves. If you've ever played old school MapleStory before, you've seen these at some point. Crafted with 15 leathers and 1,000 mesos exclusively by JM from the streets, and found as a direct drop from only 2 monsters in the game. They were easy to craft, only required level 10, and were equipable by literally every class. This was the base for all glove scrolling endeavors, being capable of achieving up to 23 weapon attack if chaos scrolls were involved, and for the record, they often weren't. This is mostly because glove scrolls themselves were already quite generous. They gave weapon attack as a direct addition, no roundabout stat increases that add up to damage improvements collectively, just straight attack. The single most valuable stat in the game. The most common scrolls you'd find came in 10, 30, 60, 70, and 100% success rates. There were other scrolls with varying levels of success rate and weapon attack increases, but the highest amount of weapon attack you would ever get from a single scroll is 3. Unless we're discussing chaos scrolls, which wasn't all that common for glove scrolling specifically. Chaos scrolls can increase a stat by up to +5, which is where the +23 attack figure comes from. 1 10% success, and then 4 +5 chaos scroll successes. I don't have any reason to believe this was ever achieved in real old school MapleStory, but it was theoretically possible. Instead, for the vanilla work glove, and most gloves in the game actually, you were most realistically looking at a weapon attack increase of +15 at most in the early days. This would require 5, 10%, or 30% scroll successes on a single pair of gloves. In a world with only 10% scrolls, that's a probability of 0.001%, or 1 in 100,000 work gloves, meaning you'd only need about 500,000 10% scrolls if you wished to achieve that. 30% scrolls make it a bit more favorable at 0.243%, or nearly 1 in 400 work gloves, which is way easier to achieve, and noticeably more expensive. Both of these scrolls give +3 weapon attack, and since a clean pair of work gloves was dirt cheap as a piece of gear, you'd find people walking around most often with anywhere between +8 and +12 attack on their work gloves. Infinite resale potential and crazy damage gains. Both the universal damage formula as well as individual skill formulas tended to heavily favor raw weapon attack, so this was a massive increase in damage output for any physical attacking class. It was so impactful, in fact, that it was often one of the most sought-after pieces of gear in the game, losing out only to weapons and projectiles. For magicians, things were a little different. You see, they received no value whatsoever from weapon attack, so their goal was to scroll gloves for magic attack. Again, we find similar stat increases as the weapon attack scrolls with the addition of int, which is very important to note. This was essentially the same concept, but magicians aren't known for outputting damage, so the magic attack glove economy was a lot weaker. Instead, players were most often utilizing these magic attack scrolls for their HP washing functionality. Any increase to int would result directly in the player receiving more MP on level up that they could turn into HP, increasing their maximum HP pool, and these scrolls gave int to gloves. Generally, only work gloves were used for this purpose because they were so low level and universal. The earlier you level with extra int, the more HP washing you can actually do. For example, you wouldn't often find high-level archer gloves that were scrolled for int. That's just stupid. Throw them away! Speaking of higher-level gloves, the most common progression beyond the regular work gloves involved finding a nice high-stat pair of class-specific gloves. For example, the Dark Emperor Warrior gloves. Level 80, no secondary stat requirements. They were basically a direct upgrade from work gloves with slightly higher damage increasing potential with their base strength, and slightly higher accuracy bonus with their base dex at the cost of marginally lower resale value compared to a universal level 10 glove. This might not be the best example to illustrate my point, with it being such a simple higher level glove equals better situation, so let's look at another upgrade path. This time for a hermit, where the needs are slightly different. Hermits are always trying to maximize their dex increases from gear, getting themselves as close to the minimum base stat value of 25 as possible, while still being able to equip the highest level claw they can. This was most commonly the Red Craven, a level 100 claw that required 140 dex. If the player was aiming to acquire the dex to equip this, they likely already had the stats to equip a larceny, one of the level 80 gloves. This would result in them having access to a few more points of dex, which was exceptionally valuable, putting them ever closer to their beloved Red Craven, not to mention the slightly higher damage increase potential from the luck on the glove. This is quite similar to a warrior's higher level glove equals better progression, actually, but these gloves were often slightly more valuable since Thief was such a popular job and Dex was such an important stat for them. So a solid 13 attack larceny was more than sufficient for an endgame Thief. The idea was primarily about getting the extra dex and compromising as little weapon attack as possible in the process. That being said, even 2 points of weapon attack being lost in this upgrade would just about nullify any benefit a player would obtain from the larceny's base stats. It's a cruel and unforgiving world, the attack glove market, but we all participated in it. The attack work glove into larceny or similar high-level class-specific glove wasn't the only way to approach glove progression, though. Throughout old school MapleStory's life, multiple new all-class glove choices were added. For example, the set of work gloves that were added in version 7. They came in many colors. There were the gray work gloves, which were nothing more than a bizarre reskin with no added stats. The blue, red, purple, and yellow work gloves, which gave a small amount of stats, though the yellow work gloves definitely stood out the most. They came clean with the almighty int stats, making them a quick target for HP washing gear. Yes, it was only a single point of int, but when you're exploiting an already precise mechanic, that 1 point can actually matter. Blue work gloves were cool for added accuracy, but again, we're talking about a single stat point. It wasn't wildly impactful. The king of work gloves, though, has to be the brown work gloves. These were the first 7-slot gloves ever added to the game, and their existence redefined the glove meta entirely. With 7 slots, 2 more than any other pair of gloves in the game at the time, it was possible to acquire a pair of level 10 gloves with up to 21 weapon attack that could be universally equipped by any character. This is more weapon attack than a clean level 30 claw, by the way. Of course, achieving such a massively powerful pair of gloves required 7, 10%, or 30% successes, but the goalpost had officially been moved as of their release. These extra 2 slots dwarfed any potential that high-level class-specific gloves might have, and brown work gloves were instantly best in slot, and instantly became the most valuable gloves in the game. Brown work gloves were obtainable from Gachapon, but the more common method of acquisition was through the Showa exchange quest. Faito and Showa Street Market would exchange items for various Mushroom Shrine enemy drops. In the case of brown work gloves, players were looking to exchange 100 Dark Cloud Foxtails for a chance at them. There were a number of other rewards in the pool, including the exceptionally valueless gray work gloves, but this was how most pairs were acquired, through mass farming of a slightly obscure monster on a map that actually has a weirdly favorable layout. These same Dark Cloud Foxes also dropped Toby Throwing Stars, Dark Crystal Ores, and Dagger Attack 30% scrolls. They were actually kind of valuable low-level monsters. Even if you didn't get brown work gloves from the exchange quest, you still had a solid chance of making decent mesos farming here. Shortly after this, in version 48's Christmas update, the green mittens were added to the files. These are 6-slot all-class level 15 gloves that fulfilled a similar role as the brown work gloves, which is having more slots than the other options. They were perfectly tradable, and the level 15 distinction didn't actually hold them back in the free market, so for their lack of relative availability compared to brown work gloves, they were still a popular and expensive choice when they were available. Then came the markers. These were in similar fashion to the extended work glove line, based off of an already existing set of gloves for archers. The color scheme between the two sets is inconsistent though, and these new markers required level 20 instead of the work gloves level 10. Regardless, the story here was very similar. The red marker's base int made it a great HP washing glove for the few players who actually really utilized that mechanic back in the day, and the yellow marker's 7 slots puts it on par with the brown work glove in terms of both value and potential damage increase. One of the more interesting type of glove in old school MapleStory are what I refer to as the pre-scrolled gloves. They're not literally pre-scrolled in the traditional sense, but they come with weapon attack clean, which I always found kind of fascinating. For example, Agent O's gloves. These were rewarded from an old event and came in 2 forms, the time-limited nylon gloves and the permanent leather gloves. The former had 2 base weapon attack at the cost of 1 slot, and the latter came with 3 weapon attack, with the same 4 slots. Since the nylon gloves were temporary though, the only ones that actually mattered were the leather gloves. Their 3 base weapon attack was essentially a free 10% scroll pass on any regular pair of gloves. But it's important to remember that this was well after the release of both 6 and 7 slot all-class gloves that were fully tradable and retained full value in the market, which is the major distinction here. While I think it's neat to hand out a free scroll success here and there, very few players invested all too heavily into these, and they're primarily a collector's item nowadays. A flex, if you will, that represents the full completion of the event. An event held 15 plus years ago. Don't get me wrong, though, that's cool as hell. If you're a MapleStory nerd. Then there were the Mush King leather gloves, which were yet another step down from the 2-attack nylon gloves, giving 1 weapon attack instead. The real distinction here that actually makes them better than Agent O's gloves is that the Mush King leather gloves retained a full 5 slots. They were acquired via the Mushroom Kingdom questline, so most players were able to get at least 1 extra weapon attack from gloves, even if they were broke boys. What I find interesting though is that the Mush King leather gloves use the same sprite as the Agent O gloves, which are already simply a slight alteration of the level 15 steel fingerless gloves for warriors. It's not exactly creative, but it's a resourceful decision, if nothing else. Finally, for these weird low-attack pre-scrolled gloves is the Goddess wristband rewarded from Orbis PQ. This came with 1 weapon attack and 1 magic attack clean, as well as full 5 slots, the standard. As an OPQ reward, which was a party quest that already required level 50 plus, this was a bit underwhelming, and again these gloves were mostly relegated to collector's item status. The real big issue with all 4 of these gloves that we've discussed is simply that they're not tradable. It didn't make a lot of sense to invest in them when clean tradable gloves were so abundantly available. And in most cases, you were only able to acquire 1 pair of these per character. They just simply weren't valuable enough to hold much weight in the meta, which is disappointing. Work gloves still reigned supreme, and they always would. Then there's the Flamekeeper Cordon, a level 50 all-class glove based off of the level 80 Archer gloves. These dropped from Firebrands deep in Crimsonwood Keep and had a unique combination of stats, 8 magic attack and 20 accuracy. Now, these 2 stats are, for all intents and purposes, diametrically opposed, which is to say that they don't make sense together on a single item. If the user benefited from magic attack, i.e. they were a magician, then raw accuracy wasn't factored into any of their accuracy checks. So if a player did benefit from the accuracy in any way, they would, by definition, not be a magician who could potentially benefit from the magic attack. It's one of those instances where an item seems a bit silly and pointless on paper, but still, this glove did have use for multiple classes. Warriors would benefit from the accuracy, of course, and an extra 20 accuracy was no joke. That's the equivalent of 25 points of dex, which is a lot. Pair these gloves with some accuracy scrolls and they could provide up to plus 57 accuracy total, which is an insane increase when you remember that most warriors were aiming for around 180 accuracy total by endgame. Magicians would benefit from the 8 magic attack, and this was the highest damage increase they would get from any clean pair of gloves in the game. You might have noticed that we haven't really discussed magician gloves very much outside of HP washing. That's primarily because magicians back in the day simply weren't known for damage output. Their role was to use ultimates and 2-shot regular monsters, so the extra magic attack did matter. It's just that this is one of those weird OSMS magician erasure things. They were important, but people really only remember them for one specific role as farmers. And you often weren't investing too heavily into a character's damage output if you were simply trying to reach a relatively accessible threshold to kill skellies or whatever. Alright, let's check in on my Eidolon characters. There's definitely more for me to do here with regards to secondary skills, but since it happens mostly passively, it's pretty satisfying to come back and grab your idol gains, honestly. I found this game on Steam a while ago now, and I've been enjoying its progression a lot. There's a good number of skills to level which can be done passively, as we've just seen. The mix of idle game and MMO elements makes it feel like an actually enjoyable experience as well. I've been playing Eidolon for a while now, and it's always nice to come back to further character progression. Eidolon allows you to make forward progress on your account even when not actively playing, and it has a lot of content, things I'm still exploring and learning about to this day. Eidolon doesn't demand as much of my time as other MMOs, and that's extremely valuable to me these days as a busy YouTuber. Sometimes I actually have to leave my house. Eidolon is available on both iOS and Steam, so I can hop in-game on my phone to check up on things, and whenever I'm at my computer, I can launch the game through Steam, and my account is seamlessly saved to the cloud, which is very convenient. You can play Eidolon for free on Steam using the links posted in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks again to Eidolon for sponsoring this video. There was another pair of gloves made specifically for magicians though, the level 50 glitter gloves. Crafted in NLC, these were magician only and came with +2 int and +200 MP. MP really didn't have a massive impact as a stat, though an extra 200 points would save a few potions over time if the player was using mana bowls. The +2 int is, in my opinion, kind of a disappointment as well. The level 20 all-class markers we discussed earlier, one of those also gives +2 int, and these magician-exclusive NLC crafted level 50 gloves couldn't even beat that. These were undertuned. Magicians deserved better. I'll be writing to Nexon about this. It's just ridiculous, especially when you consider their weapon attack sibling, the Stormcaster gloves. Renowned for their offensive capabilities, the Stormcaster gloves fulfilled the same role as the glitter gloves, but for physical attackers. All class, level 50, 5 slots, and 5 weapon attack clean. These gloves were essentially the endgame option for most players. Technically though, it was not possible for them to beat perfect brown work gloves or yellow markers. The extra 2 slots on those gloves were simply too powerful. But starting off with 5 weapon attack essentially raised the average glove weapon attack value by that amount. 20 attack gloves became far more common, and these gloves retained value for years and years. They have a cool flashy look that quickly communicates to other players how awesome and rich and dexless you are, and it was hard to find a bad pair of Stormcaster gloves. Even the worst possible outcome, not including Chaos Scrolls, would still be 5 attack, and in a game where an 8 attack pair of work gloves was considered a solid starting point, it was hard to make these gloves not worth using. And since they started out with weapon attack, they could technically be more easily Chaos Scrolled, resulting in gloves that were capable of technically reaching 30 weapon attack. Though this was not often pursued, it was more commonly pursued on Stormcaster gloves. So, gloves are kind of weird. Back in the day, you'd see Carnival PQ mules running around with Stormcaster gloves, since the level requirement just so happened to line up with the max entry level for that PQ. Same goes for Ludibrium PQ, actually. At that low of a level, it was more of a flex than a practical decision anyway. One I always found interesting though, it's like seeing those same characters rocking a Zachem helmet before Scissors of Karma were added. Come on, it's not like they actually fought and contributed to a Zachem run. They just paid for the helmet and sat there while high-level players actually did the work. Not that I'm passing judgment, I just always remember that sticking out in my mind. The iconic Carnival PQ mule look. Zachem helmet, Stormcaster gloves, sauna robe, maple candayo. Don't forget about the pink adventurer cape and face stompers. We should probably discuss those at some point.